This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is the website building platform that anyone can use to have a website up and running in minutes. Watch until the end of the video to learn more and get access to a special offer. Don't skip a leg day has become a meme for a reason. See, a lot of people just hate training their legs. A lot of people hate training in general, but for them, training their legs can often seem like the very worst bit of something they already don't enjoy, like eating vegetables. And so the internet talks about skipping leg day as this negative thing, as a way to kind of guilt people into training their legs an equal amount to make sure that they're not going to become imbalanced, top-heavy, have this big, strong upper body and weak, weedy legs, both from a health perspective and from an aesthetics perspective. But what if it actually would make sense for you to train your legs at least a whole lot less? And what if you didn't have to do what the internet tells you and you could get to your goals a lot faster by skipping legs? It's controversial, but if you hear me out, I think you'll see why this does make sense for some people and how to do it in a safe and healthy way. So this video is going to be a slightly more casual one, just some ideas. I'm actually recovering from multiple injuries that happened simultaneously but independently. Nothing too serious, don't worry, I'm sure I'll be back doing handsprings and handstand push-ups very shortly, but in the meantime I thought something a bit chilled. Also, I've had a few days off this week, so we needed something a bit quicker. I thought this was an interesting topic we could dive into because it also serves as a microcosm of a broader issue with the way many people approach their training. So a lot of people come at this idea from the right place, thinking of it in terms of health and performance. You know, it's not good to have imbalances. But here's the question: if you skip training your legs or just train your legs a lot lighter than your upper body, is anything dire going to happen? Are you going to suddenly keel over and explode? Well, the answer is no. There's not really a, absolutely unavoidable downside negative to not training your legs. What I will say is that a lot of people suffer with issues related to not training their legs, which sounds contradictory, but hear me out. If you have weak glutes that have gone to sleep, if you have the anterior pelvic tilt because of the tight hip flexors, if you can't get into a deep squat, if you can't get into a deep side lunge, all these things can come about from not training your mobility and your range of motion in your legs. So I think everybody should be doing something like this with some resistance in order to make sure that they maintain that healthy and normal function. But that doesn't mean you need to be squatting and deadlifting huge amounts of weight, or that you need to be dedicating the same amount of time to hypertrophy when it comes to your legs as you do for your upper body. And this, I think, immediately highlights one of my points, one of the issues with the way we approach our training. We tend to do what the internet tells us out of, wanting to fit in or, peer pressure, when actually it doesn't make sense for us. Because it doesn't make sense to be worried about your health and performance in terms of your legs and then to not ever train in the frontal plane, to never move from side to side, to never train on one leg, which is how we often use our legs, to not be able to get into a deep squat with your heels flat on the ground. Just being able to move through a normal range of motion, to be able to move freely and not feel stiff and locked up and painful down there, is far more important than how much you can squat or deadlift. So to call someone out for not having big legs whilst not being able to do those things, to me that just doesn't really make sense, and it suggests that your training is based more on what you think people are going to say about you online than what's actually useful for you. So that's the baseline I think everybody should be doing. Everyone should be doing some deep squats, some Cossack squats, lunges side to side, leg mobility work, but I don't think everybody needs to be lifting extremely heavy. We're going to talk in a moment about the athletic benefits of lifting extremely heavy and why a lot of people should do it. But if you're, for example, someone who's only interested in aesthetics and you just want to have that, cover model body, then you don't need to be spending equal amount of time on your legs, because that's not what people are going to be looking at. You're going to be wearing trousers most of the time. I have a friend who's an actor. He wants to get into great shape so he can land more roles, and most roles aren't going to be bothered about what your quads look like. And if you're somebody who's a hard gainer who struggles to stick with your training and you never get the transformation you want, and then someone's insisting that you have to spend equal amount of time training your legs just because that's what people do, it doesn't quite make sense. I'm not someone who's only interested in training upper body for aesthetics, but if you are, then that's absolutely fine. Likewise, I know someone who does a lot of sports and activities who already has really big, strong, powerful legs as a result of that. Not bodybuilder legs, but really performant legs. And they just want that look to go with it. They want to look ripped and muscular while staying light and explosive. For them, it doesn't make sense to spend huge amounts of time training their legs to the same degree because their legs are already great. And this is true for most of us. Most of us walk around on our legs all day, especially if you have a standing up job or you cycle a lot or if you play sports. So I wanted to put that out there. But at the same time, in terms of performance, do you really need to train your legs as much as you maybe think? And again, I'd say for a lot of people, it depends. So if you're a powerlifter and you're really interested in getting big squat and big deadlift, then yes, of course you need to do big squats and big deadlifts. You're going to get big legs. If you're someone who's just interested in being really, really strong for the sake of being really, really strong, which is obviously cool, then yeah, you need to train your legs, because a lot of power and a lot of strength comes from your legs. This will lower your center of gravity as well, make you heavier, make it easier for you to push people and things around and just be this like walking tank. Then yeah, you need to train your legs. So that makes sense. But then I want you to examine some of those goals and objectives, because again, it might not be quite as clear cut as you think. Because when I hear people say that they want to have big legs so they can push people over and just be immovable, the question is then, are you also doing wrestling? Because that's where you learn to push people over and become immovable, if you really are interested in that. If you're not doing that, then you might want to ask yourself when the last time you needed to push someone over and be immovable came up in your life in any capacity. And chances are, not very often. Same with picking really heavy things up off the ground. How often do you actually pick up really heavy things off the ground? And here's the thing, when you pick up really heavy things off the ground outside of the gym, and you guys who watch this channel regularly are going to know what I'm going to say, you need to do it in a completely different way from picking up like a really, really heavy barbell. So you need really strong grip. You need to, hug the weight in towards you very often. If it's like a boulder or something, you need to grab it like this. So you need strong biceps. You're going to need a strong enough core to maintain it. It's probably going to be front loaded. You very rarely carry something that heavy on your back. And you're likely going to need strength endurance. You're going to need to be strong for a long time, because you don't just pick up something once. We usually pick up something and then walk with it, do something with it, pick up lots of things multiple times, for most labor. And it's usually not going to be a 1 rep maximum. So in all those regards, in terms of actual functional, useful strength, you still obviously need to train your legs, but I'm just saying there's a lot of other stuff you also need to train that often gets overlooked, which is where the functional training comes in. So I'm saying, not that you don't need to train your legs, but if you're training your legs really, really big because you think you have to, because you think that's what makes you strong, well then that logic is flawed, because unless you're also training your grip, unless you're also picking up heavy things off the ground, doing stuff like sandbag training, well then it's not really going to carry over. It's fine to want to build the legs for their own sake, of course. Maybe you want to have big legs, big strong legs, but if you want them for performance, they're just part of a puzzle. And the same goes for wrestling. Studies show that building bigger, stronger legs will make you better at wrestling, grappling. But studies also show that rotational movements, wood chopper and things like that, also make you better at wrestling and grappling. And a lot of people don't train their rotational movements at all. So if you're saying to me, you're training your legs to be big and strong because you want to be able to push people over, be immovable, and you're already not doing any kind of grappling training, and then you're also not training your rotation, which is just as important as the legs for that, well then that doesn't really work as a goal anymore if you're really interested in those things. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't train your legs, but I'm saying that if you should train your legs, then you should also train your rotation, if that's your reasoning, if that's your logic. But what about running, sprinting, jumping, climbing, all that stuff? Well actually, if you've got a big squat, if you've got a big explosive deadlift, then you're going to be able to jump higher. So you might be saying, well, that's why I want to train my legs. That's why everybody should be training their legs, because it transfers to better movement and better performance. And this is true. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean really heavy squats and really heavy deadlift, which take up an awful lot of recovery time. For example, studies also show that kettlebell swings are kind of equal to heavy deadlift when it comes to jumping height. And this makes sense, because a kettlebell swing, as someone said in the comments, and I love this expression, is kind of a holistic deadlift. It's more similar to jumping. So if then we can accept that deadlifts and kettlebell swings are kind of equivalent when it comes to jump height, and what you're interested in is jump height, it just becomes a matter of what would you rather do. For me, kettlebell swings are more fun, and for me they're more convenient. Maybe you prefer deadlift. Like I say, it just depends on what you prefer. And even if one turns out to be slightly superior to the other, because I'm sure someone's going to tell me, actually, this one's slightly superior, like, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter what the 0.5% difference is, unless you're like competing, at a world standard. You can just pick the one that you like. The real reason to be annoyed at an assertion like that is if you feel like everybody needs to train the exact same way you train, or the way that you train is suddenly no longer relevant, which isn't the case. Everyone can just do their own thing. Likewise, as JC Santana, the functional luminary, points out, when we jump in sports and athletics and parkour, we don't drop down into a deep squat and then leap off with both legs. What we tend to do instead is leap off from running. We barely bend our legs. So actually what's more important here are things like ankle stiffness and calf strength, so that you can return energy to the ground, and rather than produce the force, you're actually translating the force upwards or forwards. This will make you faster, make you jump higher. And you can train this with things like jump rope. You can train it with things like car pushes, truck pushes, sled pushes, all those things. And these allow for quicker and easier recovery as compared with heavy squats and deadlifts. Then there's things like rate of force production, generating power quickly. And for this, you can train with things like depth jumps, plyometrics. So again, I'm not saying that you definitely shouldn't train heavy squats, because you should. But if you want to run faster and jump higher, there are other avenues to achieve the same thing that actually allow you to stay lighter, and they'll fit more easily into most training programs. And this is why a lot of functional coaches their aim shouldn't be just to get their athletes to bench and to squat and to deadlift as much as humanly possible. That looks good on paper. That's good for them. That's good for business. But it doesn't necessarily translate in the most efficient way to performance, in the court or on the pitch or on the track, because you can get similar benefits by training in a way that has less of an impact on the rest of your training, and that won't make you as heavy, because of course strength to weight ratio becomes a very important factor when you're talking about jumping, running, etc. One really cool example of this actually is the Maasai tribe, who are a somewhat nomadic tribe in Kenya and Tanzania, who can jump as high or higher than many basketball players, professionals. And they can do this because they have this ceremony or tradition, I'm not really sure, where they bounce up in the air over and over again. And so they're getting higher jumps just by practicing jumping, which I just think makes so much more sense than trying to get a higher jump by just squatting. And you'll notice that when they do it, they actually have relatively soft knees, but they're not completely going into a deep squat. So they're absorbing just enough impact, bending their legs just enough to absorb the impact, but then springing straight back up. It looks more like jump rope than anything else. Maybe I'll have a go at it. I definitely shouldn't, because I've got a hurt foot and leg, but I'm kind of excited to give it a try now. Just goes to show, though, they're not squatting extremely heavy weights, but they can jump higher than a lot of athletes because they practice this, and it makes a lot of sense when you understand the biomechanics. And again, there's also that thing where people will say that they're squatting heavy and deadlifting heavy because they want to be able to run faster and jump higher. They're kind of alluding to functional performance. But then if you ask them, well, when did you last run or jump? They can't answer. And I'm not saying that means it's not useful to be able to run and jump. That's not my point. My point is that if you're really interested in running and jumping, then the priority should be running and jumping. You should be practicing those things. There's a technique to running. There's a technique to jumping. And if you're saying that that's what you're interested in, but all you're doing is squatting, it kind of seems like you're just trying to take a shortcut, or again, you might just be following the advice you've been given. You have to really think about your training and what it serves and why you're doing it. Again, if you're just interested in powerlifting, if you're just interested in lifting more for the sake of it, then great. But if you want to be able to run faster and jump higher, then do that, a bit, but also run fast and jump high. Otherwise, it's just essentially cosplay. And that's coming from me. Likewise, once again, strength endurance is very important. You don't want to just be able to do this once, you want to be able to do it over and over again. A lot of people have issue with doing plyometrics with lower rest times or with higher rep ranges, because they say, you're losing that rate of force production. You're not training the very thing that you're setting out to train. But again, this actually doesn't quite add up, because in the real world, you don't just do one explosive jump and then go home. You do it as well as running and stuff. So this is the conditions under which you need to be able to perform explosively. All I'm saying again here is that if your argument is that you need to be lifting really, really heavy with your legs because it's going to translate to this better athletic performance, well then not necessarily. There's other aspects you can be focusing on. What I would say is that everybody from a health perspective should probably be doing some kind of resistance work for their legs, ideally through a full range of motion in the frontal plane as well as in the sagittal plane, and ideally in the rotational plane. They should be standing on one leg, because again, we often produce power from one leg. But we don't need to be doing really, really heavy lifts any more than we need to do any of the other functional things that I recommend on this channel, like rotational work, like grip strength, like scapular protraction. It's all important. It's just that leg training, heavy leg training, just has better press than a lot of this other stuff. So I'm also saying that, for most people, the ideal scenario is to train heavy legs, sure, but not super heavy. And if you are someone who struggles with that, or whose goals aren't aligned with that, then you can, without guilt, scale that back and focus a lot more on just training your upper body, or just training the skills you want, or training the sports you want, and letting your legs in that way take care of themselves. It's not mandatory for anybody because no training is mandatory. There are so many things that we should be doing, we can't do all of them. You need to know your goals. This is what I was talking about in my previous video where I coined the term body crafting. Not bodybuilding, not trying to be as big and strong as possible, not focusing on just one metric, not trying to be the same as everybody else out there, but instead deciding what your goals are, what you want to look like, how you want to perform, and then designing your training around that. And of course, what this also means is that you perfectly can train with just your body weight, and that makes life a lot easier if you don't have access to a gym or lots of heavy equipment. Let me know what you guys think about this. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content. Check out my training program and ebook, Super Functional Training 2.0. Comes with over 2 hours of instructional video and an 80+ page ebook, and it's all about training all your different aspects at once. So your strength, your speed, your mobility, to a kind of nice equilibrium, whilst also even training your brain and other less often focused on things. If that sounds cool, then check it out. Either way, thank you so much for watching this one, guys.
And bye for now.
By the way, guys, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. So Squarespace is a website building platform that makes it extremely easy for anybody to get started with their own website and then to build something that can compete with the very best on the web. Get started with a website in just a few minutes. You can simply select from the many templates on offer that look professional and beautifully made, and then customize them to your heart's content to make them truly unique. Or even easier, you can use their new AI tools, which will streamline the process even further, make it even quicker. From there, you can then add all of the features you could possibly want. That includes everything from a fully integrated commenting system with threaded comments, replies, and likes. You can add gated members-only content for easy revenue generation. There's SEO tools, that's search engine optimization, to make sure that you get your site to the top of Google so that more people find it. There's appointment scheduling so that you can book appointments with clients and sell your services online. Pretty much anything that you could need. So it lets you build a website in minutes, literally minutes, that looks and functions as well as the very best on the web. And that's why some of the biggest brands on the web use Squarespace. If you want to find out more, then go to squarespace.com. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Bioneer and you get 10% off your first domain or website. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Thanks to you guys. Bye for now.